Welcome to this special edition of the Sport of Bowling Show. On this episode, we feature InsideBowling.com founder Mike Flanagan, USBC Senior Director of Digital Media Jason Thomas, USBC Senior Director of Equipment Specifications Tom Frenzel. And now, it's time for the Sport of Bowling Show.
And good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Sport of Bowling Show. Today is November the 1st, 2022, and you know what that means. That means that Thanksgiving is upon us, my favorite holiday, and we've got that to look forward to a little bit later in the month. But today, we've got a very special edition of this show. Second show in a row where we're talking about hardness findings. The last show, if you haven't seen it, is on our YouTube channel. It's archived. You can go back and watch it. It's with Ron Hicklin from Creating the Difference, where he did some ball hardness testing, third party on his own at the United States Bowling Congress headquarters at the ITRC. And today, if you didn't see it already, just published through USBC Communications is the ball hardness research report. I actually have it in my other screen here. It is 24 pages in length. That's pretty heavy, as I mentioned on the last show. And, you know, to go over this and read through it is very difficult. I've been around bowling for a very, very long time. And I don't really know much about this. I don't consider myself an expert. But the good news is today we do have an expert on to explain the findings that's inside this 24-page document. We've got some video for you as well. It's going to be a long Sport of Bowling show today. But if this topic interests you, I invite you to stick along for the entire show here today, as I think you're going to learn a lot, as well as so am I, as I am just like you, the bowler, not versed in this, but ready to tackle it. So today's show officially is the Hardness Report episode. Very special episode for you today. We got a lot to get to. So at this point in time, I would like to bring in from Arlington at the Bowl TV studios, my man, Jason Thomas. Hello, Jason. Welcome back to another Sport of Bowling show.
Hi, Mike. And just to be clear, I am not the expert that you were alluding to earlier today, although you will hear my voice a lot.
Yeah, you are the voiceover guy at USBC. I hear you at convention. I hear you at Junior Gold for every squad. And today we're going to hear plenty of you. And I got a chance to watch these videos just early this morning. Great job on putting them together. And I think the people are going to learn a lot today.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the hard things about being a part of this, and I get to talk to Tom Frenzel, who you're all going to get to hear from here in a minute. He's incredibly fun to talk to, especially if you're into nerdy stuff like, RGs and differentials and oil absorption. He's an expert on all that stuff. And I always spend a lot more time talking to him than I planned. But, it's also kind of frustrating sometimes working here when you hear some of the things that are out in the public, and maybe there's some information out there that is not true because Tom Frenzel's researched it, and you have this data and you have these facts. But sometimes when you look into that information, it brings up other questions, and it leads you to have to do more research. And I was just very happy to see that this project kind of coming full circle and this data being released to the public, which is going to let people kind of see where basically the issues are going in terms of ball hardness. And there's a lot of stuff in here that I was surprised about, being a bowler and an unqualified scientist to learn about. So I think it's going to be interesting for people.
Yeah, I like that you said that. I've had a little help from my friends as the song goes, and preparing for this one here. Typically I like to interview people and talk through different things in bowling. It's very easy for me, but when it comes to this stuff here, I want to make sure that I get it right. And I actually prepared a little something here with some help, as I said. But basically, as bowlers, we've all seen a lot in this sport. When we see things and try to explain it, it's usually based off of opinions, right? So our opinions are usually unqualified, unlike Tom today, who is qualified, but almost always is what we believe. And then somebody usually has to test it, and it always is curious to see if what we believed is true, and if the data aligns with what we were thinking. So today, that is really what we are doing, as you alluded to. Our softer balls, always better. That, of course, is what we have seen and thought and believed to be true. But now we're going to actually get to see through the science and the findings whether or not it's true or not. So I guess with no further ado, JT, we should bring in the expert. He is the want to make sure I get his title right. He's the Senior Director of Equipment Specifications at USBC. Mr. Tom Frenzel joins us. Hello, Tom.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Now, Tom, you and I have never had a conversation ever before. I know nothing about you, and I'm sure much of the audience doesn't as well. So, Tom, could you give us a little bit about your background and why you're qualified to be here today?
Well, sure. I'm happy to do that. So my name's Tom Frenzel. I'm a lot of things, one of which is a bowler. I started bowling when I was 11, and I've done it consistently throughout my life since then. I ended up going to college for a couple different things. I went for music. I switched to physics. I graduated top of my class with a physics degree. And looking for a job afterwards, I find bowling research engineer after like 3 months of struggling to get a call back. I got the call back. It's the only call back I've ever gotten. And I've been with USBC for, it'll be 9 years on the 5th. Worked my way up from just doing the research on the ground level, presenting to committees, and they decided it'd be a good idea to promote me to director of the department this year. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. And moving forward, just learn as much as I can and trying to do what's best for bowling.
Well, I can certainly tell that you work in that department and you don't work in media. No offense there. But no, I've seen you in videos with JT, and JT, you've learned a lot from this guy, right?
Oh yeah, I said, like, every time I go down to the ITRC, I stop by Tom's office, and there's always some new topic that he's been researching that I pick his brain about, and I was like, well, okay, well, when are we going to get to tell people about this? This is awesome, right? And he's like, oh, maybe a year or two, right? So it's fun, but it's also frustrating.
Yeah, I can understand that totally. But I've enjoyed the work you two have done that I've seen through USBC Communications. JT, I'm going to take things from here and let you get the videos queued up. We have a bunch of videos for everybody here today. So goodbye, JT. You are the weakest link. So now, Tom, we're going to first talk a little bit about the research here in just a moment. The first video that we have for everybody. Can you tell me a little bit what goes into this first clip that we have here, talking about the history of the research and in kind of setting up what the performance tests will be testing for?
Right. So the history of this research we're looking at here started a few years ago, and it's really going to outline the testing we've been doing in the field and what all that looks like. It's been a long time in the making, and there's a lot of really good data here. So I'm looking forward to share it with everybody.
All right. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and roll that clip and learn.
USBC's historical field test data, which are available on the equipment specifications pages on bowl.com, shows that urethane balls drop in hardness with use, and the drop in hardness eventually levels off at a certain point. These field tests also revealed that reactive shells showed little change in hardness after use, and that duplicating the USBC field test is difficult for a tournament operator because of the time, costs, and manpower required, as well as the number of variables that must be controlled to yield consistent results. In 2022, USBC conducted controlled lab testing on the two most popular urethane balls on the market to investigate the impact this softening phenomenon had on bowling ball performance, specifically looking at overall ball path, total hook, and entry angle.
Okay, Tom, so tell us a little bit about what prompted all of this research to begin with in the first place.
Yeah. So, I mean, what really started the research was, people saying these bowling balls don't meet spec in the field. These balls are too soft. Right. And so we do our thing. We spot check the balls in question. We find them well within spec out of the box. And we go out in the field and we see what everyone's been telling us. When you use these balls out in the field, they're softer than they start.
Okay, so they're softer than when they start. So that probably, sparked a lot of, questions that were coming in to your department. And I guess, the next question I have for you is, how much historical data did you guys have that was available for this topic, going into your tests?
When you say historical data, I would say we didn't have enough. I think for a period of time, the industry kind of stepped away from hardness. If you look really far back, there's some history to reference. And then eventually there's a gap to where we are today. So I would say we didn't have a lot, but we've done up a lot since we started.
Yeah, we're going to find out more about that, of course. So when did you guys start doing the performance testing? When did you guys get started on that?
Yeah, the performance testing is really, really accelerated space really this year. We did a lot of documenting the field of what's going on, but this year we really dug into what does it mean, and that's where we're finalizing it into this report.
And obviously, it was a challenge to try to figure out what it was you actually needed to test. So, what were the parameters in which you decided what even needed to be tested?
Well, whenever you're doing science, it's best to try to recreate what is actually happening as accurately as you can in a controlled environment. So step one for the performance testing is like, hey, well, what do these guys do? They get a new ball, they sand it, and they throw it, and they try to strike, right? So the use case scenario, we're trying to do just that. Use our robot, throw it like a pro, strike as much as possible, and track what happens to the ball's ability to hook, to enter the pocket, and all those things. So that was one of the first things we looked at. And that's probably the area you see the surprising results. So we're like, well, let's go look at some other areas and see if we can better understand what people have thought about this for a long time.
I'm glad you mentioned, professional, because I am a professional USBC Open Championships competitor, and I remember going there for many years, and getting my bowling ball checked for hardness with a tool I believe called the Durometer, which is what everybody uses to measure the hardness of a bowling ball. And now we can actually take a look at a little bit of the history of the Durometer.
For over 50 years, the tool that has been used to measure the hardness of bowling balls is the Shear Durometer. The tool was invented in 1915 and has stood the test of time as an accurate measurement tool used across a wide range of materials and industries. Shear Durometers operate by having an indenter needle of a tightly specified shape press into materials under a regulated spring force and pressure. 1 point of difference on the scale relates to 1/1000th of an inch of penetration into the material. The American Society for Testing and Materials Standard calls for all calibrated durometers to be designed such that it is estimated that there is only a range of plus or minus 2 points of hardness across the thousands of calibrated durometers that exist. This means that any group of calibrated durometers testing the same material would be expected to agree on how far they penetrate into a material to a range of 4/1000ths of an inch. Measurement system analysis conducted on the durometer used in USBC's lab tests shows its gauge discrimination to be plus or minus 0.7 points, which is well within the acceptable range for calibration. The device is also calibrated regularly to ensure consistency. There are several factors that can affect durometer readings, such as material consistency, temperature, humidity, and test operation. This is also why durometer testing is best conducted in a laboratory environment, where the testing variables and procedure can be tightly controlled. USBC has published standard operating procedures to create consistency for these factors, which are available to all stakeholders.
Okay. So we learned a lot about the durometer there. I think there's a lot of people that question whether a durometer is accurate or not, right? I've seen that in social media anyway. Tell me why the durometer can be that tool, and that it's a useful tool, and that it's an accurate tool.
Right. So to understand why a durometer is an accurate tool, you kind of just need to break down some of the things we're saying there. Like, what is a 1/1000th of an inch? Right? That's easy to write the number down on paper, 0.001 after the decimal, but 4/1000ths of an inch is roughly the thickness of a human hair. Right? All right, so soak that in. So these durometers across all of the ones that are made, you poke them through the standard procedure in these materials, and we're talking about a human's hair breadth difference in depth down into the bowling ball. They're a very accurate tool. But a tool is only as good as a specification range. If you get too close to a limit with any accurate tooling, the range gets smaller and things get harder to maintain.
Okay. And with it being harder to maintain, I think one question that all of us would have is how do you ensure over time that your durometer is getting the same reading, say in January or in November of the same year?
Right. So we do calibration of our durometer regularly with the tool manufacturer. We send it out at the bare minimum. Every 6 months, it gets calibrated. But while it's in the building, we have a standard group of balls to test, and we'll test them to make sure it's reading right.
Okay.
So we're putting forth in our new procedures that are just being released that we're going to check them once a month. We'll also check them anytime there's anything found non-compliant. And it's always a check on the tool before anything else.
Okay. In the video, we saw, some field testing going on there, and we've heard things, about field tests, I've seen on social media as well. Probably not the best PR for the United States Bowling Congress over the course of the last, I don't know, however long this has been going on. But the question that I have is, how difficult is it to conduct a field test? Now I understand more why you guys were doing it. It makes more sense to me. Light bulb goes off. But, how hard is it to mirror the results between what you're seeing there in Arlington and what you're seeing, say, in Las Vegas?
I would say it's extremely hard. And
Okay.
and in addition to that, I'd say I'm a stubborn person. And saying something hard just makes me want to try it, to do it better. And
Okay.
yeah, it is hard to do. And in order, there's so many factors to control with the temperature, the state the balls are in, collecting them, receiving them, cleaning them. There's so many factors that it's just very, very hard.
Yeah, I would imagine, altitude, humidity. So I believe a controlled environment is probably what has to be. I think that's the key buzzwords, right? You got to have a controlled environment.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, I'm glad I'm learning something here. Okay. So there's been a lot about ball hardness over the years. And I believe the PBA actually had to introduce a hardness rule back in the day. And to find out a little bit more about that, let's check in with Danny Speranza, Senior Director of Equipment Specifications.
As far as the history of the bowling ball hardness specification is concerned, it is something that also goes back to the time when durometers were first used to measure hardness in bowling balls, approximately 50 years ago.
Hardness really came about because the pros back in the 70s started soaking polyester balls with a solvent and making them softer. And so at that point in time, USBC said, hey, we better set a hardness spec. The PBA set a spec at 75. We picked 72. Now, all the manufacturers want to get their balls on TV on the Pro Tour, so all the shells, they needed the ball to be above 75. Well, they can't make it at 75 and guarantee it'll be 75. So they were shooting for 77, 78. And for years, the PBA and at Nationals, we checked hardness of balls, and they always pass our 72 spec. I mean, because everything's being built at 78. And then at some point in time, the PBA said, everything's 78. We don't need our 75 spec anymore. We'll eliminate that. That immediately allowed the manufacturers to 72s by now don't go below number. And so hardnesses of balls over the years, over the decades, have crept down closer to 72.
Wow. That's probably the most interesting thing to me, being a bowler and student of the game, is what Danny just said there. That and I knew this, but it was a good fresh reminder. We had rules on the PBA that were different from USBC, right? That's how I interpreted that.
That's
Can
right.
you expand upon Danny's thoughts there? Because I have a few questions.
Right. So, you have this period of time where they have a spec limit, 3 points higher than ours. And manufacturers don't want to build the two different specs if they don't have to. So we're gonna pass the more stringent one. and that just passed ours, and it makes everything very far away from ours. And in that period of time, there's really nothing going on. Well, when the field checks go away there, and eventually they go away at the Open Championships, the only things the manufacturer limit the approval number in our testing room, and over the history, you can see that trend downward, and then we end up where we are today, right on the line.
Yeah. So when you say trend downward, is it your belief? It's my belief, but again, as I opened with, it's just opinions. When it's not as policed, number one, I think is what you were saying, and number two, that PBA was more stringent than USBC, which a lot of people would say that's backwards now. USBC would be more stringent, right, as the public perception. But you think that manufacturers, to be competitive with one another, have started to really flirt with that line, is what you're saying?
I think we see in the data that there's a clear advantage to getting more performance out of softer equipment when it's made softer. So I think as one manufacturer pushes down towards the line, they start to develop an advantage, and then the others start to chase them down to keep up. And that it's that competitive chase that leads them to where they have to go.
Yeah, and to go a little off script here, folks, just me, someone who's worked many professional events, I've heard the professional athletes speak to their ball reps, speak to their manufacturers, speak with one another over lunch or a beer or whatever it is. There has been talk that I've overheard on multiple occasions of, hey, how come we don't have a ball that does that? Hey, how come that person has that ball and that's a specific advantage? We don't have a ball that can do that. So I would believe that a lot of feedback from the professional athletes that I've observed has gone back to the home office, to the research development teams, and it has actually pushed them to try to create pieces. And I agree 100% with what you're saying there, that very much could have happened, and why we've seen some of the craziness, as I like to describe it, that we've seen over the course of the last year or so. But very interesting stuff there, that happened. I kind of wish maybe if the PBA still had their rule around, a lot of this stuff we've seen in the last year wouldn't have even happened. So at least from your guys' camp, so to speak. Okay, let's move on to what we have next here. I think we're going to get into the urethane. That was a big topic here. Why urethane balls get softer with use. Let's take a look.
For many bowling ball experts, the idea that urethane balls could even get softer with time seems counterintuitive. When a new ball is manufactured, it continues to cure over time, and chemical bonds make new connections throughout the material as molecules move and shift. Unused bowling balls newly off the manufacturing line initially tend to get harder as part of this curing process. USBC has monitored this phenomenon and agrees that this is the case. However, what occurs with use of a urethane ball is a different story. Used equipment has always shown the opposite, in that urethane balls get significantly softer with use. USBC research has highlighted three key aspects that appear to be the root cause of the softening, which are friction causing shear forces within the cover stock, oil on the cover stock that can degrade the urethane at impact measurements, and altering the surface of the cover stock with a chemical solvent. Shear forces are forces applied to a body which result in shear strain. These forces during bowling can come from several potential sources, including the friction between the ball and the lane, the carpet belt taking the ball out of the pit over to the ball door, the belts sending the ball back up the ball track to the ball return, and the wheels lifting the ball to the top of the ball return. Due to the differing chemical compositions of different types of bowling balls, these forces can impact hardness in different ways.
A urethane's going to be better at springing back to where it was, but you got to think, when you stretch something over and over again, what happens to it? Ultimately, it weakens. You keep stretching an elastic band, sooner or later, it's not going to come all the way back.
There you were. Thank you for that. So here's just something here also that I was a misconception from a bowler, right? When reactive resin bowling balls came out, they appeared to be softer, more tacky. They gripped the lane, more change of direction when it came off the oil and hit the friction of the lane where there's no oil. big sharp back ends, things like that, right? So the assumption is, to me, that a reactive bowling ball would get softer over time because it appears that it's tacky, it's made of resin, and that a urethane ball, which I always believe to be a harder substance, that was just me, my brain being a bowler, that those would not get softer. But through all of this testing, that's why you're in that job and I'm not. You have seen that urethane balls do get softer in time, and I've seen that published, but now you have it here in this report.
Right. Yeah. And we did a lot of research into the chemistry of how a urethane ball is different than a reactive ball. We talked to some chemical experts at the manufacturer level, at the urethane supplier level, trying to really understand why it would happen in one case than the other. Throughout the research, you'll see we're talking about urethane balls and reactive balls, and urethane being more elastic or more flexible. The rubber band I used in that video, they're easier to deform and kind of bend out of the way. You might notice if you drill a hole in a urethane cover stock that it comes back a little smaller than you thought. It's because the urethane's bending out of the way of the drill bit versus being hard and rigid. Reactives, on the other hand, get soft a completely different way. So they're more brittle because they're highly plasticized. So this is plasticizer that helps them achieve their softness, even though for the structure part of it, it's actually held tighter together where it is held together. But it's also porous because this plasticizer prevents bonds, and that leads to all kinds of other phenomena like letting the oil in and things of that nature. So they are, in today's game, both getting towards the lower limit of hardness, but they do get there different ways.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Did you expect the balls that softened with use to hook more than they did at their manufactured hardness, or less?
Going into this research, I think we all thought hardness was hardness. If you lose 7 points, it wouldn't matter, right? I think that was the natural assumption, but that's not what we saw in the data. We use these balls and we see the hardness drop off quickly. We saw drop offs the size of what we saw in the field, and we just weren't seeing the hook move. Versus when we did the manufactured difference, it was so obvious with just a few shots how much earlier and how much more the softer ball was.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but you've got the data there to prove it, I guess. Well, not I guess, I know. So we talked a little bit about shear force there in that part of the video as well, which I found interesting. The one thing that I think many of us forget about is that when a bowling ball gets out of your hand, it touches a lot of things before it gets back to you. It has to touch a lane, which can alter what it's doing, oil. It has to hit something of metal in the back, a carpet. It has to go up a couple of ball wheels, down a ball track. So it's constantly being touched, which obviously can alter how a bowling ball performs after it comes off your hand, even after just one shot. So more about shear force coming up now.
To research this concept, USBC designed 2 tests where hardness was measured before and after on 2 different urethane and 2 different reactive bowling balls. The first test was to apply friction to the cover stock using a coefficient of friction measurement system used in the standard USBC bowling ball approval process. The second test was to apply friction to the cover stock by recreating how a ball interacts with the lane equipment. Hardness was tested in the spot where the ball contacted the lane panel, both before and after subjecting the balls to a specified number of sled pulls. The results showed that the urethane balls changed an average of 5.7 and 2.7 points of hardness, while the reactive balls experienced an average change of 2.1 and 2.2 points of hardness, respectively. The next test involved simulating the friction created by the ball lift mechanism in the ball return. The 4 balls were placed on a ball spinner, and as the balls spun, a ball return wheel was held against them for 20 seconds. The largest differences in hardness were observed immediately after the shear forces were applied. After allowing 15 minutes for the balls to cool, the hardness changes decreased. After 2 hours, the balls completely cooled off, and lowered hardness values were still observed. 2 days later, testing showed the same results, illustrating that these samples had been permanently damaged. Additionally, The data also shows the urethane samples changing in hardness more than the reactive samples. The balls were then sanded to a fresh 500 grit Abralon surface, following USBC's standard operating procedure for bowling ball approvals. After sanding, the urethane balls returned to within 1 point of their original baseline hardness, measured before any testing, which indicates that the damage is isolated to the outermost layers of the bowling balls. However, the balls were not able to be fully restored to the original hardness of the samples, which suggests that sanding the balls is yet another example of applying shear forces to the surface.
Okay. So a lot there. I just want to know if you were the one that had to actually hold that wheel on the ball spinner to.
You know what? I didn't get in on holding the wheel to the ball on that one, but I did see some of it. And man, he's smoking the tires.
Yeah.
You can get pretty hot that way.
Yeah. I don't know if that's on the job resume report there, but no, seriously, that's all very good data. And, it just goes to show how thorough you guys are in trying to, really take a look at what these things do. I've got a couple of questions here that I put on paper before this interview after I watched. So I'm going to go through those now because I'm really a novice when it comes to this, like many of us are. So the first one is, why does it seem to impact the urethane balls more than a reactive ball?
Well, it really comes back down to what I was kind of saying about what we learned about the chemistry, where the urethane, the polymers are easier to stretch. The shear forces is stretching them back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and that causes them to weaken. And in the reactive, it's rubbing on them with the same amount of force, but since those polymers are more tightly held together where they're connected, they're just more resilient to the damage. So we think the damage will still happen. It just may take longer or stronger forces to cause it.
Yeah, and then most people know that balls do soften through heat. Were you surprised to see that balls remain softer even after getting back to a cooler temperature?
I mean, I think some of us would have lost the bet on that one. Yeah. I mean, we were investigating it, so we were like, well, it might, but yeah, we thought it was going to come a lot closer to normal than what we saw there.
Okay. And then one of the images in the video showed durometer needle punctures at the microscopic level, which kind of lost me, to be honest with you. But what is the difference between the images of the reactive and urethane balls, and what does this say about the varying chemical composition?
Well, I think I mentioned previously, we got expert input and, what they told us about the chemicals. But anytime we use an outside source, we also like to try to go back and confirm that somehow. We'd like to have something more concrete that we've done that we can say, hey, that's absolutely right. Or maybe it's not absolutely right. So what we did is we took urethane reactive samples, punched them with the durometer, and then used our 3D laser microscope to measure the depth of the hole. Now, the durometer works, so you go down 1,000th of an inch and you get 100 minus that many thousandths in hardness. So if you're measuring 73, that's kind of telling you that needle went in 27 thousandths into the ball, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at those balls, what you're seeing is with the reactive ball, you were left with an indentation that was almost the full depth of what the durometer predicted. We were seeing, within 1,000th of an inch of what the durometer predicted. But with the urethane ball, what we're seeing is much, much less. About 30% of what the durometer down into the ball predicted was seen in the microscope. So what is that telling me? It's telling me that the needle's able to bend the urethane down to get to that 27th penetration and read 73. And then it rebounds about 60% of that deflection when the durometer leaves.
Okay. I'm glad this is your job and not mine. I just want to go buy a bowling ball and throw it down the lane. But now I understand a little bit more to where all this was coming from. And God bless you and your team for all the work you've been doing on this. We're talking hairs here, like you mentioned earlier. We're talking hairs, like a hair on your head. Crazy stuff. So I guess the next thing we need to get into here that we have a clip queued up for is in regards to oil. Oil is a big factor when it comes to bowling ball performance. Let's take a look at how oil can impact that bowling ball.
The impact of oil on measuring bowling ball hardness was also tested, as it was determined at the onset of USBC's hardness studies in 2019 that testing through lubrication can allow the durometer to penetrate deeper, resulting in softer readings. The Durometer manufacturer also confirmed that testing through lubrication is outside of the scope of how durometers should be used. For this test, 14 balls were checked for hardness under 5 different conditions, which included a baseline prior to applying oil, testing immediately through the oil, wiping the oil off with a dry towel and retesting, testing through oil that has been applied to the ball for 2 hours, and wiping the oil off with a dry towel and retesting. The results showed that the balls changed in hardness anywhere from nearly 2 points to as much as 3.6 points when tested through oil. The hardest values came from testing before any oil was applied, and the softest values came from when oil was on the covers for the longest amount of time. Cleaning the balls with a dry towel was ineffective at removing the effects of oil from the test. The test was also conducted on 8 reactive ball samples, with the step of wiping off the balls with a dry towel omitted, since all the samples absorbed the oil well within the 2 hours after the oil was applied. The results here showed that testing through oil has no measurable effect on reactive balls. This is also why an isopropyl alcohol cleaning process was incorporated into all field tests conducted in 2020 and beyond. Taking all of this into consideration, the premise that urethane balls do not get softer and only measure softer due to lane oil is not consistent with the data from these tests.
Okay, so you guys put these things through a lot of oil tests, wiping off balls, trying to basically simulate what would happen as a bowler was bowling, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think there's a natural tendency based on just how bowling equipment is. Urethane and reactive, they handle oil differently. We all know it. The reactive soaks it up. The urethane doesn't. There's a natural tendency if we see a difference, oh, it must be the oil, right? And we're no different. We went there pretty quickly as well. And we even we got Rex on the line. So we're thinking about testing through some oil on these bowling balls. What do y'all think about that? And they were like, I don't think we'd recommend that. And they went into how, what stops the needle. It's the needle's got to push the material out of the way, and it's got to, there's friction on the sidewalls of this needle, and lubrication's going to affect that. So they don't recommend that you lubricate it, not only because it can affect the measurement, but as the needle moves up and down, it can work its way up into your tool, and then it can make you have an oily tool. And yeah, so they've definitely recommended not doing that. We still did it for science sake, and then made sure we sent it back to them, make sure everything was good after we did that.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
This is totally off topic, but this is something I'd like for you to maybe research in case you've already done it. But that clip in there where it shows the oil hitting the reactive ball, and then you didn't have to wipe it off because 2 hours later it's just soaked into the ball. I mean, do reactive balls get heavier? I mean, because if it's soaking up all this oil, a sponge, if you put it in water, it gets heavier. How come reactive balls don't weigh like 20, 30 pounds?
Right. I think I should study that. My bowling coach told me that when I was a youth bowler. I don't know if he had any data, but he used to tell me you should bowl 15s instead of 16s because they get filled with too much oil. You'll be DQ'd at events. I'm like, okay, coach, I'll stick with 15s.
We're on a strict time budget here, but you know what? I'm going to go off course yet again here since you just brought it up there, Tom. When I was in high school, bowling isn't considered the coolest of sports in some cases, and every once in a while, people gave me the business for being a pretty good bowler. By the way, that is my own little fig jam there. By the way, But one day I got one of the football players. He said, "Yeah, Flanagan, he's a great bowler." And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "What's the toughest thing about bowling?" I said, "Dude, it's when we're bowling outdoors and it starts raining." I said, "I got to put on those special cleats." And he goes, "Really?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, we've got 4 different pairs of shoes. It's not just for indoor." And he believed it. So there you go. That I can make you laugh today, Tom.
Yeah, that's good.
audience is like, hey, let's get back to the topic here, man. This is a serious topic. Okay, let's do that. Okay, so we got through the durometer testing through the oil. Let's see. How do you ensure that the oil on the cover does not impact the hardness measurement during the field tests?
Well, I think, it's definitely one of the challenges testing in the field. And what we found is the best ways to mitigate it is to clean the balls as good as you can and to separate them from the time of bowling for as long as you can. Those two things help you get the oil away from it as much as possible.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Coming up next, we've got a few more clips here. And by the way, all of the videos that you're seeing will be released in entirety. And there's more to it than just that we're showing here today on the USBC YouTube channel. And I'm sure will also be going out on Facebook as well. But let's go ahead and take a look at some side-by-side performance testing of the two most popular urethane balls on the market.
For the first test, 3 samples of the 2 most popular urethane balls currently on the market were chosen and put through a series of tests to determine how use impacts the hardness of the balls, as well as how the resulting change in hardness affects bowling ball performance. The same testing process was used for both bowling balls. Testing showed that the first ball softened by 1.4 points after 10 shots and by 3.8 points after 190 shots. The second ball softened by 3.4 points after 10 shots and 7.1 points after 190 shots. To measure the impact on performance, the 2 bowling ball types were evaluated on ball path shape, overall hook, and entry angle throughout the tests. This chart shows the average ball path shape for all 3 samples of ball A. If we compare the ball path shape of the first and 6th sets, we see little difference despite the 3.8 points of hardness lost. Ball B showed similar results. Comparing the ball path averages for the first and 6th sets for this ball, we see that the average paths were about 1 board different at the breakpoint and returned to the same position at the pins. If we examine the difference in sets 2 and 6, we find that they were thrown on more similar lines, and there is very little difference as exhibited with urethane ball A. So, even with the 7.1 point drop in hardness over use with this urethane model, there is still very little difference in ball path shape performance. In terms of total hook and entry angle, there were also minimal differences relating to the reduction in hardness over time. Both measurements remain similar throughout the testing, and the slight variations relate more closely to the angle of attack on the pattern rather than the observed loss in hardness. Just like the testing showed with urethane ball A, the difference in hardness measurements for urethane ball B did not correlate to differences in total hook or entry angle.
Okay, so you guys took the 2 most used, most common urethane balls. I think we all know which balls those are, made by different manufacturers. So, what were you looking to find in this test here?
Well, this test was the one I kind of hit on earlier is that, we just want to throw these like the pros are throwing them and see what happens over time. And our goal was set out, we're going to throw them until we see the hardness drop, and then we're going to evaluate the performance difference, right? So we saw the hardness drop really quick. 190 shots were down as low as the field. That's like 13 games. It's not a lot of bowling to get to 190 shots, and we're just not seeing the performance move. So, definitely not common perception there when you look at it from a hardness perspective, but does it match common perspective from is my ball stronger than it was 3 weeks ago perspective? I think it does.
Okay, so if I throw a bowling ball, a urethane bowling ball, it's going to get softer over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that give me an advantage by having a softer ball? Like, is what you're saying that I don't have, that's not going to affect the performance based off the data that we saw in the video?
Well, what I'm saying is if you're bowling with a urethane ball that you have, and it does something when you have it on game 1, what is it doing on game 14? And then the data saying it's basically the same thing as game 1. Even though the hardness now reads, 3.5 or 7 points softer.
And from a physics standpoint, is that because there's like oil soaked into the ball now? Like, what's the reasoning behind that?
Well, just right back at the data, we're seeing shear forces doing 2.5, 3, 4 points of changing throughout these different balls, different tests. And we're seeing oil being 2 to 3 points of something. We're trying to test these balls in the cleanest state the day after they've been used, even to get these numbers. But some oil, some shear force, some third thing we haven't discovered yet. Yeah, it's making them different.
And I just got to ask before I forget to ask the question, how many hours of research and time and energy and resources of people do you think you guys have put behind all of this testing?
Right. This data has, over thousands of shots with Earl in it. It's incorporated down to these small amount of average ball paths. But, you've got, I think we did a dozen balls at some point, 190 shots each. We really did a lot of shots and a lot of hours that go into this type of research report.
Okay, so coming up next, we have a couple of clips here showing the results of testing two balls that are the same make and model, but one is softer and one is harder. Let's take a look.
For the second test, USBC looked at two otherwise identical urethane balls of the same model, but with very different hardness readings out of the box. The first ball measured 78.6, and the second 73.4. Earl's testing parameters remain the same for this test as they were for test 1. But for this test, Earl threw 7 series of 6 shots in an A-B-B-A-A-B fashion. The results of this test were much different, with the average ball paths of the softer ball showing a 3-board difference over the harder ball, and a 0.7 degree increase in entry angle.
Okay, so I guess, the surefire question here is, do the findings in this test reveal that revoking the approval of the 16 and 17 purple hammers from the USBC approved ball list, that may have been the right decision?
The data definitely shows that when balls are made softer, the chemistry is poured to make the ball softer, that they perform stronger. So that, coupled with the investigation that revealed many of those balls were being made under the line, definitely supports the decisions that have been made.
Okay. So what processes do you guys currently have in place to prevent softer bowling balls of the same make from the manufacturer from getting out in the field?
In our equipment specifications manual, we have an outline spot checking process. It's where we go out to distribution. We buy balls from the distributors and we put them through the testing. We select balls based on balls we know to be close to the line on approval. And spot checking is where we find anything that might be underneath it.
So you guys do spot check bowling balls completely random?
We have a process in place. We pick a random ball that's close to a line from each brand once a quarter, and then we apply the process outline in the manual to it. So we do spot checking once every quarter.
Once a quarter. Okay. Mm-hmm. And how many bowling balls do you guys choose to do? Can you talk about that at all?
I mean, the process is very well outlined in the manual. So I'd just be saying what's there. But we buy a 4-ball box of a ball of each brand, and we test it for whatever it was close to the line for an approval. And if we find, depending on what we find with those 4, we'll get 4 more, or we'll get 24 more, and we'll evaluate a statistical model on the results, and that's what makes these determinations.
Okay, so let's say you guys brought in a case of Mike Flanagan's signature balls, obviously the greatest balls ever made. Mm-hmm. And those 4 balls roll in, and you notice that 2 of them are under softness. Okay. Okay. You would then go back to the same batch at that wherever you purchased them from and get 8, 10, 12 more.
So in the case where we find 1 or more of the 4 samples out of spec, we'll immediately get 24 more of them from the distribution. And that'll give us a sample size of 28, which we build a bell curve off of based on the serial numbers, the days it says they were made. subgrouping them by serial number, and then we'll evaluate the defect rate. And Mike Flanagan, you'll be notified of our findings, and things will progress from there.
Okay. So what if all of the rest of them are okay and just one was bad?
Well, we have to go with the data provided. We'd be happy to see data supporting the rest of them being fine, but data will make the determinations.
Okay. All right. I'm just curious. Going off script again with that, but I just am an inquisitive mind that it would like to know. And then would you inform the Mike Flanagan Bowling Ball Corporation at that point in time? Hey, Mike, we found one of your balls was under the hardness from XYZ distributor on this particular date, just to make you aware. And then would you communicate with me throughout the entire process of what's going on?
The manufacturer is the first point of contact in the event that we got something out of spec.
Okay. So I would know first. So the bat line rings. I go, oh boy, we might have a problem here. I hope that things are going to work out. And this was just something as a fluke.
Yep.
And I could potentially say, oh, your durometer is got to be off today because, it can't possibly be Mike Flanagan's Bowling Ball Company having an issue here. It's got to be your durometer. I got to pass the buck on to you. Potentially because I know all my stuff's in spec, but you just said earlier when we went over the durometer that you guys check this thing quite often and it's well within spec.
If we're contacting you about balls that you made that are out, we have already checked it.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. All right. Thanks for letting me know. All right. Let's see. Let's move along here that we have. I think we've got one more clip for everybody. And then we'll wrap things up. And that is in regards to soaking bowling balls. We've seen a family, 3 generation. I have a lot of respect for them, but the grandfather is the grandfather of soaking bowling balls. Let's learn a little more now.
The next and final test involved investigating the change in hardness, footprint, and total hook related to chemically altering bowling balls of different types, including urethane, reactive, and polyester models by soaking them in methyl ethyl ketone, or MEK. The hardness and performance tests showed that after soaking in MEK, urethane balls softened more than polyester and reactive balls. Their footprint, which is defined as the area that contacts the lane, also increased the most of any ball type. One urethane ball sample also showed a greater increase in hook compared to polyester and reactive balls after soaking for 2 hours. Reactive balls were the least impacted, and they actually returned to their original hardness or got harder over time after soaking.
Tom, why are we as bowlers so creative that we want to soak bowling balls in, what is it, MEK, they said there in the video?
Well, I think it's kind of like a NASCAR, maybe like a Ricky Bobby mentality. You ain't cheating, you ain't trying, sort of thing. But we all like to do stuff. I will say some of the research we get to do here is the most fun stuff. Is sometimes the ones where we get to break the rules, right? So this was a very fun study for us, going back in time to 1970 and trying to figure out what was going on. We did similar studies with the balance hole rules and side weight, putting pieces of lead inside of bowling balls. It's fun to say, oh, there's a rule for this. Let's go break it and see what happens. I think bowlers are pretty inquisitive by nature, and sometimes it's fun to break the rules, just not in our competitions, please.
Yeah, it certainly is fun to break the rules. I will tell you, I am guilty. All my buddies and I, when we were, youth bowlers, thought we had to put the ball in the oven to soak the oil out of it, right? Because we're gonna get better performance. But it's just crazy that we as bowlers do that kind of stuff. We used to go to the grocery store and buy Cinch, or that had ammonia in it, or we would buy acetone, or all these different things. I guess the question I would have is, why would it be a bad idea for someone to want to soak a bowling ball?
Well, there's a number of factors. The leading one means it's going to be disqualified if that's uncovered. The other ones is some of these chemicals are very dangerous. That's why we put disclaimers all over it. We don't want anyone getting hurt. Those are probably the 2 leading reasons right there.
Okay. All right. Well, I got one final topic for you here that I just wanted to personally ask a little bit that I think a lot of people may want to know a little bit more about. I think we've learned through today's video and through answering all the questions, which thank you, by the way, for being here for this, is, we saw the urethane. That was like part one of the issue that we saw on social media and the issues with hardness that a lot of people didn't understand. And then we also learned today that urethane balls are affected way more than a reactive ball, which earlier we talked about how shocking that was to me because urethane balls are known to be softer. I always thought because they hook more, right? Well, we have seen in recent past, unfortunately, some reactive balls, either not be able to be used anymore or not being able to be used in USBC national tournaments, right? So how did we arrive at that? Like, what was that? Why did that happen there, in your opinion?
Well, we arrived at it because we followed our spot checking procedures, and unfortunately, we found some stuff we didn't want to find, and it put everybody in a bad situation this year. And it's just the result of the practices that are in place, the policies that are in place. There's no here or buts about it. It's what we found, so we acted on it.
But not shocking based off of what we learned earlier regarding the PBA rule, going away, the spot checking going away, and competitor or manufacturers trying to be competitive with one another, trying to create the best performing products for people to achieve the best results on the lanes, right?
Yeah, I think everyone's trying to do the best and make the best bowling ball they can, and I think they're all doing a great job. They're all competing with each other, trying to win market share. They're doing everything they're supposed to do. It's just when we get really close to specification limits, there's a danger, and unfortunately, this happened.
Yeah, it really is unfortunate that it did happen. And I know you guys have probably been sitting on a lot of these results and still having to do further testing before you could come out with anything. But this 24-page document, my goodness gracious, Ball Hardness Research Report 2022 is now available. I don't know if it's available on a Kindle or not, but it's available at bowl.com. I know you can go download this thing. You can check it out yourself. Tom, is there anything else you would like to let the folks know that have been watching this hour-long special Sport of Bowling show, Ball Hardness Research Report episode, that you would like for them to know on behalf of you and your team at the Research and Development?
Yeah, I would just like everybody to know that, we're here and this is the type of research we're doing. This is one of the many specifications on the many types of equipment that we try to regulate here at the campus. And we've dug really, really deep, and we've learned a whole bunch about bowling ball hardness. There's always going to be plenty here to research here at the campus, and we're always going to be doing our best to research our equipment, understand our specs, improve what needs to be improved, and do what's right for the future of bowling.
Okay. Well said. Well said. Well, Tom, I've enjoyed my time here with you today. Thanks for being here, and hope to see you in a future episode talking about more stuff that can kind of wow us and make us think a little bit more when it comes to the sport of bowling. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right, let's bring in JT. JT, thanks for running the show here today. A lot of good information, and you're right. I did get to hear your voice quite a bit throughout today's show.
My apologies. You probably heard it a little too much.
No. It's always good to hear.
Thank you. Yeah, I just thought it was so interesting. I mean, I get to see Tom on a daily basis almost down here when I'm here, not covering an event. And I always ask him, hey, what are you working on? And we have these conversations. And, sometimes it deals directly with some of the stuff I hear out in the field. And it's just nice to be able to, every so often, allow that information to come out in the public. And, sometimes people don't agree with the information. Sometimes they might have a problem with it. But, my answer to that is, hey, if you want to become part of the process, you can be. I mean, that's what's so great about USBC as an organization. I actually wrote a column on that in Bowler's Journal this month. If you want to get involved and you care about bowling, there's a way for you to get involved in stuff like this and have a say. And so it's just nice to see the information come out. There's going to be debate over it. There's going to be, people coming out with other information that we may have to do other research on, but that's why we're here, to govern the sport.
Yep, you're absolutely right. I think a lot of people lose sight of that because everybody wants to look at the bells and the whistles, the media department, the stuff that you work on, the tournaments and what's happening within them and the storylines and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes down to it, national governing body is what USBC is and will always be.
Well said.
So what do we have coming up here? Every 2 weeks we're doing Sport of Bowling shows, and I'm loving doing this. This is our second one. We've talked about Hardness now on a couple of shows. We're gonna have more shows coming up. We're gonna have some guests. We'll have some not so hard-hitting topics, but more maybe a little more entertaining topics moving forward. But this is very important to get out there. What other things might we have coming here in the future from headquarters?
Yeah, we've got a bunch of announcements coming out regarding next year's schedule. The first one that's coming up here pretty quick is the PWBA season schedule announcement. A lot of people I know have been waiting for that with bated breath, and we have some exciting things to share about that schedule. So we're looking forward to that being our next episode of this show. We're going to have a couple of players on to talk about their reactions to the schedule and what they're looking forward to and what they've been up to in the off season.
Oh, great. Yeah, looking forward to that one for sure. And PWBA, don't forget, you can go watch it on Bowl TV.
That's right. That's right. Bowling lives here.
Yeah, bowling does live here. And as a matter of fact, I am leaving on Saturday to head to Las Vegas as we will be broadcasting Ron Moore's Super Senior Extravaganza, multiple events daily, all on Bowl TV. And you guys were nice enough to staff us up well. Craig Elliott, Brian Kane, myself, and the one and only Tom Hess, who I think is the most excited person to be there. And the three of us all stream all the time. So Tom, we're just going to let Tom do everything.
It's the A team. And we've also got a couple of collegiate events that are going on at the same time while that event's happening. So
awesome.
Just a lot of stuff going on here on Bowl TV.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone at USBC headquarters in Arlington. Thank you all for watching this very special edition. Thanks to JT and to Tom for joining us here today. I'm Mike Flanagan. Until we meet next time, hope everybody stays safe out there. And don't forget, start planning for Thanksgiving. It's coming up here in just a few weeks. Have a good day, everybody.